Hey, and welcome to another Main Contain Fishing Podcast along on the Paddle and Fin Network. As tonight, we bring you an aquatic biologist. I've had him on the show before. Knowledgeable guy. So what we're going to do tonight on this episode is kind of break down the fall situations on how bass react to the fall, where they go into your local honey hole, where they disappear to, and how can you catch them and things like that. So with that being said, sit back, grab you something to drink, and enjoy the show. And we would like to welcome Mr. Shan O'Gorman to the Main Contain Fishing Podcast for the second go around. Hey man, we're going to break down the fall situation on bass, of how the bass react in the fall. So you being around the bass industry for a while and doing other fisheries, you've currently got one going under Sugar Hill, and you're doing pretty well with that one. And we were just talking in the backgrounds about some drawdown situations and how drawdowns kind of help the fisheries and help the bass going into the next year as far as pre-spawn and spawn situations. So, hey, man, we got a lot to cover tonight, man. So I'm going to just kind of let you introduce yourself again to the world and to the Paddle and Fin Network family. And so kick it off, Mr. Shan.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I believe I've been on a Paddle and Fin one other time. Was it with you, or you're new to Paddle and Fin?
Yeah, I'm new to Paddle and Fin. Yeah.
Okay, I recognize the logo. I've definitely done a talk with them once somewhere. I've kind of lost track. I've been fortunate in doing these kind of things, so I've been on quite a few of these. And like you mentioned, the pond that I take care of, I just stocked it new. I'm showing people just basic fisheries management. How ponds are managed. People sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect between understanding it. They think it's a natural kind of self-contained system that'll balance itself, and ponds aren't. Ponds are man-made usually, and especially in the Southeast where I do most of my work, and they're not self-managing. You kind of have to manage them, really no different than a garden or a farm or anything else, along those lines, really. So the pond, I stocked it with a basic bass, bluegill, kind of red ear, just standard recommendations you'd get anywhere from any state biologist on how to stock a pond almost anywhere. And we've been doing that, just feeding those bluegill and watching those bass grow over the past 3 years. And they're growing real fast. They're growing well. It's really not hard to do if you do the steps right on pond management. And it also helps you be able to kind of relate to taking the next step and understanding more complex lake management, because it's not a simple system of 2 or 3 fish species in a lake. And you have to kind of understand how all those fish interact with one another to be very good at managing lakes. So the pond is a good kind of crawl before you walk type of exercise. And it's fun to get the kids out there and get them fishing. We got Clint's very generous with the pond and getting a lot of young people involved. and that's been real rewarding with the project as well.
Right. So let's kind of dive deep into this situation, Shan, with these ponds and these smaller bodies of water and the fall fixing to kick in here in the southeast and the south, and how would you kind of describe of how the bass react in a smaller body of water compared to a larger body of water? That's kind of the topic that we're at tonight, and kind of explain to all the listeners and the viewers tonight of how the bass react in different situations.
It's complex, I feel like in the ponds that I manage, the fish seem to be more sensitive to temperature changes. And I think it's because it's a lower volume of water. So it's going to have a more drastic temperature change on an upswing or downswing. I don't care if it's warmer or colder or whatever. Pond water is going to swing faster than, say, a big, reservoir, right? Then your lakes would be somewhere in between. But your lakes then, depending on where you are they large, shallow lakes? Are they narrow, deep lakes? The type of the lake, also the depth and just the way it was made will also affect that. But generally speaking, in ponds, if you're real down into the pond part of it, they're going to be you'll have big fish on good habitat almost all the time. I could consistently find bass on usually good wood habitat near a ledge. It would always keep decent bass year round, no matter what time of year you ran the shock boat by it. You generally would pull good fish off something like that. You definitely see differences in it. Sometimes the fish would be up on the edges. Sometimes the fish would be out in deep water, but for the most part in small lakes, and just, don't make it too complicated. I don't think they're going to be right where you think they are. Now, once you get out in the bigger public water that's pressured, that's going to change things on you. And now you'll definitely be into a more, the fish will be more on a pattern. They'll be in areas where there's nobody. Fishing pressure will push them around, change the bite on you. You don't have to catch it. You can see it in pond management. You don't have to use a lure very long before the bass catch on. Hey, that's not food. Usually it's about every time you've caught one bass, if you stocked about 100 bass in the pond, and about the time you catch 90 of them is about the time that lure will stop working. They'll figure it out pretty fast.
So that's a good point, because I've never really thought about, I fish a lot of bodies of water down here in Southeast Georgia that are, I would say, from 5 to 50 acres. So I've really never thought about it. You sit there and throw a Texas rig all day long, and then you come back the next day and throw the same Texas rig and you don't catch no fish. It's kind of like training a dog to go fetch a bone, right?
Yeah, kind of in a way.
Yeah. So it's so I find that very, very interesting that you just said that you caught 90. You say if you stocked 100 bass, you caught 90 of them. Now they're trained not to bite that.
Yeah, you can call it lure resistance. That's one way they describe it. You can feed train anything. You can train fish to feed. And so I've always said it this way: if I can train a fish to feed, I can train a fish not to feed. So I just, over years of managing smaller ponds, you start getting into under 10 acres, under 5 acres, especially, guys will have the same types of conversations where they instantly think something's wrong with the pond. I'm like, okay, so why do you say that? Well, because I can't catch any fish. All right, well, let me go put the electrofishing boat in there and pull some fish out, and all the fish are growing well. All the fish are looking good. There's no disease. There's no parasites. There's no problems. The only problem is you can't catch any fish. And then the next statement is usually something like, Well, I've thrown every lure at Bass Pro Shop has. Like, yeah, in a 3-acre pond in the behind your house, and you're just going full Bassmaster Classic on it every day. Calm down, killer. Don't fish it for a while. Quit showing them all the daggone lures in the tackle box every single day, and it'll start working again. And it does. You know, they can't remember forever, you know, but if you show it to them every single day, they're going to remember that, you know. So that's definitely something that you have to be aware of on private water is, you know, not to show them every trick in the book every 5 minutes. But now that's where, you know, it gets tougher on public water.
Right.
You know, you can't control that. If it's a highly pressured fishery, then it's a highly pressured fishery. You're just going to have to get better at fishing.
Right. So on a highly pressured fishery, and I've always heard this statement made is you're going to have to finesse them. Is that because they just become more finicky, or does that mean that they just?
I think it has to do with the lateral line. You know, you're talking about an organ that's so sensitive that bass don't even need their eyes. They don't really have to see to feed. Like, you can blindfold them as long as they got their lateral line, they can catch it and catch it head first. So, because I've lived around Lanier most of my life, and that's one of the most highly pressured fisheries. And there's a correlation between dropping your line size and the number of bites that you pick up in a place like that. And I think that also correlates to the bass are very in tune with the vibrations in the water. And when most people are on 8-pound test and you're on 4-pound test, your lure presentation is different. Your vibration signature is completely different. You know, they're not tuned into something with line that light. And, you know, your lure looks a little bit different, swims a little bit different, feels a little bit different, and generally gets bit more. We've done all kind of little live bait comparisons with 4-pound, 6-pound, and 8-pound test line out the back of the boat, you know, and it's always the 4-pound test line that gets bit the most. So I've never seen a scientific study about that or anything. It's just kind of where my brain goes sitting around thinking about that. There's got to be something physical about it. And I would think they can literally just feel it. It's as sensitive as like bat radar, you know, it's really sensitive. So they just be tuned into, you know, you get 12-pound line in Lanier and you're fishing for one bite all day long. If you're lucky, you know, your line's too heavy. You ain't catching nothing with that, you know?
Yeah. So going back to a cold waterfall type bite, then, would you say that during the fall bite, do you think the water degree kind of changes what kind of line, what kind of bait you might use because the fish are not as active feeding? Would you say what would your opinion be on that?
Oh, probably the opposite of what you think normally. Like, yeah, you do have cooling temperatures. Yeah, you do have, you know, metabolism and everything in the book telling you to slow down. But I don't. I go to jerk baits. I go to speed. I burn Buka's bull shad lures, straight braid. There's not hardly any line in the water. There's not hardly under the water. Same with the jerk baits. Same with the fluke. Same with the spinner baits too. Just burn them. Absolutely. And any of the rattle traps work good in the fall. Yo-yo and traps, getting a reaction strike out of them there. But yeah, just a real burn and pause retrieve. I do well on that in the fall. Always have. Or sweep the rod and pause. You know, just tinker with ways to move the lure quickly and then pause it. I think. I don't know. The bass just seem to be a little bit more, for lack of a better term, I'll use the word playful. You know how like you play with a cat,
Yeah,
like on a feather with a string, you know, and kind of you can kind of tease bass into biting that way in the fall. And that's what I mean by it. And just crank up the speed. I mean, you'll be fishing jerk baits till your arms hurt. You're fishing them so fast. And I don't fish them like that all the time, but I certainly do fire up the speed this time of year. And one other thing about the fall too that we can touch on, just fish safety wise, something to be aware of. Make sure you use wet hands. Don't lay your fish down on dry carpet or on a dry board or anything like that, because the surface layer of that slime coat on their body keeps bacteria out. But as the water temperature cools off, it won't regenerate. So if you lay them down handle them with dry hands, or lay them down on dry carpet, dry board, whatever, and peel that slime coat off in the fall, it's going to stay exposed to bacterial infection until it warms up next spring. And that's going to do a lot, but it's going to have the fish immune system engaged and burning, trying to fight illness instead of trying to put on egg weight or, reproduce or whatever it's supposed to be doing. Its energy is going to be used in the wrong way. So, in catch and release fisheries, the idea is to keep good fish health as well, and not do, I don't know, I just say that because it seems like you turn on YouTube or some of these social media things and they do everything they can possibly do to kill the bass and then turn it loose. And it's like, you could have not done any of those things to that poor fish.
Yeah, going to that is, you see these guys fishing in these aluminum boats, even big bass boats with carpet, with aluminum metal hatches, and they're fishing June, July, August here in the South, 100-degree days, and they're boat flipping these fish, and they flop around for a few minutes. They get their hands on them, they turn them, and they throw them loose.
Yeah,
I'm like, holy crap, man! You just ruined that fish.
They certainly, and there's room to argue there, because bass are awfully dang tough. The fact that you want to split hairs and say you didn't kill it, yeah, that's fine. But at the same time, when there's a very clear, just common sense will tell you don't want fish with bacterial infections. You want to treat all animals with respect, that they deserve. If we know there's a certain way to handle them or a certain thing that can be done to make that better. That's what I like about kayak fishing. A lot of the kayak tournaments are just weigh them, measure them, click them, put them right back. That's not hurting anything,
No.
And I prefer that style, from my perspective, looking at if you had a pond and you wanted to have fishing tournaments and still grow your fish real nice, that would be the way I'd recommend you do it. Fish all you want to the point where you've fished them to, like we talked about before. Careful with overfishing them, but just take a picture of them and put them right back and make it quick, and that's real safe for them. Just some simple fish handling stuff, that you would treat any fish that way. You would treat a goldfish at the pet store that way, but for some reason, bass seem to get skipped on we deserve respect kind of for the handling. I don't know. It's very strange. I don't understand some of the things that I see sometimes. So I definitely like to bring up that. But that being said, the main lake points is where I'm starting to find a fish. I'll just go out to the main lake points this time of year and burning any kind of crawfish pattern, any black. I like those Black Magic by 6 cents. Square bills that 6 cents makes. That's a good fall. That's a good fall. Cover some water. Of course, any of the mega bass, 110 plus, 110 junior, anything in there, I'll let that thing hunt all over the lake, fire it in every direction, especially once it starts cooling off, they'll be spread out, So and I do have like where it works, it's nice having the forward facing, where you can just look out there and see them. But if you can't see them, that's what I like a jerk bait, You can cover more water. You can fish it fast. You can fish it slow. There's a lot of different varieties of them now. some suspend, some sink slightly. Really fish different levels of water with them. I found they'd be a little bit better on pure Florida bass as well. They've become more of a go-to bait for me. I try them every time out here when I'm in Central Florida, where when I used to fish, mostly northern bass in Georgia, I never noticed that correlation, but the Florida fish seem to be, more speed. Put some speed to the lures.
Right. Well, that's where the speed worm was developed down in Okeechobee, wasn't it?
Yeah.
for that purpose.
Speed worms are good baits around here.
Yeah.
They sure are.
So, yeah, we're talking about the fall here. And when I first got into bass fishing, I really didn't throw no crankbaits, no jerk baits. I threw a brokeback Rebel for topwater.
Yeah.
And I throw a Texas rig worm.
Yeah.
And so last year I threw a lot more crankbaits and more jerk baits and things like that during the fall transition, even into early spring transition. And I got some big bites, especially fishing points on lakes and like Clark's Hill. I was up at Clark's Hill fishing the tournament and saw some fish busting. I didn't know if they were stripers or hybers or whatever in the big reservoirs. I said, well, if I hang one of them in a kayak, I'm just going to take a ride. But yeah, I ended up catching some pretty good bass on jerk baits. And I was like, oh, holy crap. I've come up on something that I've never fished before. So,
yep.
So,
they can be the de-skunker for sure. They give you a lot of advantages in tournament fishing, I think. Just if you just look at the, I guess, physiology of it, or probabilities. Look at it like probability. Like if you drop a worm down, right, and depending on how you fish that worm, of course, you can snap that worm. You can move that thing 3 feet up or over the fish's head or whatever. Like it depends on how you fish that worm is whether or not you're going to get a reaction strike. But I would say most people aren't fishing a worm for a reaction strike. They're just slowly dragging it, right? They might be hopping it. They might be bumping it. They might be dragging it, but they're usually doing it pretty slow. Whereas your crankbaits, one technique I've always done in the fall, you get the deepest diving crankbait in about 5 feet of water, 6, 8 feet of water, but I'm talking about a crankbait that drives, is going to dig into 12 feet of water, and you're throwing it up in 3 feet of water, and then just crank it into the bottom on the rocks and just let that thing hunt all over. Just let it hunt. Just crank it right into the rocks and bang it off the rocks and just keep tension on it. And you'll find that speed where it gets the most deflection, and just crank deep divers right into the mid-range rocks, and bass will come unglued on it. It'll just get heavy. It'll feel like you reeled it up into some carpet. Just keep cranking.
Oh yeah,
that's another thing too, man. I've had a couple different rods. The technology now is so much better, but don't throw treble hook baits on worm rods. Get you a decent crankbait rod. Get a little moderate flex action on it. Get the right rod. That'll help you a lot.
Right. So, kind of summing up this fall thing before we move into the next subject is, so if I'm fishing a 15-acre lake farm pond, it's got some good drop offs. The deepest part's about 21 foot. It's got a road bed going down the center of it. It's got maybe 2 little points on it that go from 3 foot to about 15 foot. In your opinion, where would you, if you were fishing that type of fishery, where would you start at?
Well, like I talked about earlier in the green room, if I'm going to go looking for big bass, it's going to be on wood structure near the deep part of the lake. So I look at the lake and just like see where, which side of it is the steepest, which side of it has the most elevation change coming into it. So I know that's the steep side. So then I just start looking for any blowdowns or any wood that I can see sticking up out of the water on the steep side. And that'd be where I started. And I'd rotate back to it. I don't just fish it once. Fish it 15 acres. You can fish that half a dozen, 10 times. You just keep making laps around it, pick that place apart. You might be on, especially in small water. Sometimes you got to hit them right in the nose with it. They can get finicky in smaller places. And smaller places, people talk like sometimes it's not, it doesn't count because you caught it in a small lake. Well, sometimes small lakes can be really tough to fish. They can be well trained. And once they get big fish are big fish, there is scientific proof that some fish are never caught.
Right.
That's just how it is. You're not going to trick them all. But short of that, normally what I do is I'll set up with like a 3-rod setup on the kayak, and then I'll make my first lap around the lake with those 3 rods. Maybe one's a worm, one's a chatterbait, one's a crankbait or something like that. Just kind of 3 different things. And then I'll work each piece of structure that I find around that first lap with all 3 lures before I move. So I kind of break it up a little more scientifically, I guess. And then after I've worked around once, if I haven't caught anything on anything, gotten a bite on anything, I reevaluate from there.
Right. Okay, good point. So, golly, because this place I'm talking about is one of our fisheries around here, and I'm kind of keened in.
Does it have shad? That's another thing too. Like, what is in a 15-acre lake? You could be like all bluegill forage base. You could have thread fins. You could have thread fins and gizzards. You could have you could have anything really. Carp, chub sucker.
So the majority of this is probably brim and that type forage.
Yeah,
maybe some crawfish once in a while, but but most of it's brim.
Yeah, that'll change it a lot. What is the forage base? Like especially in the fall, because the shad, I don't know why they do it, but they'll be all up under the surface, all over the whole lake starting in the fall. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like they'll just sit there. You can see it when you bump the electricity on an electrofishing boat because they dart and they're all right up underneath the surface. As soon as you cut it on, they all dart away from you. And you can see them. They're just sitting there with almost their backs up out of the water. They're right there at the top. Why they do that, I do not know, but they do it, and bass respond to it. And that goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, moving your baits, throwing them in any direction. Are you in a shad lake? Because any direction became a lot more important because those shad are going to be up under the surface of the water. And that's how Mike designed those baits to be fished. Yeet them across the lake 5 miles and pull them across that top 3 inches of water with like a laser, just burn them.
And you're talking about that buka shad, right?
Yeah. Any of the buka baits, starting with the small one that's like the 3.5 one, it's like $14, all the way up to the most expensive one he makes. Y'all fishing pretty much the same way. And again, like I think having a swim bait, having something like that, putting something different out there that they don't see all the time, that's real important. To pull that big bite. Those big fish are going to be well educated. You need something a little different.
Right. Yeah. So Shan, we've been going about 30 minutes now, so we're going to cut to a little commercial break. And we will be right back, folks.
Z-Pro Lithium right here. So as you see, they make every single battery you could possibly need for your outdoor adventure, from a 12-volt 10 amp hour to a 12-volt 50 amp hour, all the way up to a 36-volt 55 amp hour battery. They have everything to cover you. I love these batteries because I know when I get on the water, I'm good to go. I don't have to worry about, it running out of juice. It keeps me going all day long. And we're on the water for at least 10 to 12 hours a day, pre-fishing, 8 hours a day during tournaments. And I know I've got the power to get me from point A, point B, spot lock. My electronics are good, and everything is going to be solid throughout the day.
Hey guys, and thank you for Z Pro Lithium. It saves me a lot of time on the water. I power my Helix 7 with it, my GoPros with it. I get 5 to 7 days of good 8 hours of it out of my 12 amp 30 amp hour battery, 12 volt. So if you want to check them out, go over to zprolithium.com and they will get you hooked up. So we were just talking about the fall fishing on the first half of the show with Mr. Shan O'Gorman, and so we're going to bring him back on for the second half, and we're going to dig into some other things with him and kind of see what his take is on some other things that I have to ask him with hurricanes and with salinity of water and things like that. So let's bring him back on and get the second part of the show started. Mr. Shan, welcome back after the commercial break there.
I just saw the chat here. I didn't click on the chat.
Yeah, there's some people fishing with us tonight. We got Mr. Tim Williams, we got Grimmy Fishing, we got Michael Bradley with us. If y'all have any questions, certainly put them in the chat. We'll get them at the end of the show. So we're gonna. Yeah, he's one of them said you're finally got to see your smile again, man.
Yeah, well, I haven't been going live as much. I've been busy.
Yeah,
I've been getting ready they're draining the lake, so I'm getting ready. I'm getting my game face on. I'm developing my chi. It's about to be on for the next 6 months. So I've got to get mentally tough and rested and lines changed. So that's what I've been doing. But gotcha. Yeah, man, when they drop this reservoir down for weed control in the wintertime, it's on. They do it better.
I'm ready to see some tanks on your Instagram, man.
Yeah, I'll you know what they say, if you can't beat them, cheat them.
That's right. But yeah, the second part of the show, we're going to dig into these dang hurricanes that come through and these tropical storms that come through the southeast and kind of mess up the water and the water levels. And I had a good friend to reach out to me the other day because she had a slightly fish kill in some of her ponds. And me, I go straight to the internet and try to type in the Google search, kind of see if how hurricanes and tropical storms and just a lot of them large storms that come off the ocean water onto the land kind of affect the fisheries, and if it dumps a lot of water in there plus flooding. We had some extensive flooding down here in the southeast from the last tropical storm. Mm-hmm. So just kind of give me your opinion. Do you think that the salt water that these storms bring onto shore kind of affect fish and oxygen levels in the water?
Yeah, I think for this time of year, probably the easiest place to point the finger at that fish kill would be a turnover situation. You get super hot temperatures followed up by super rainy, super rain. So you get it's a situation where the warmer the water gets, the less oxygen that it holds, right? So simply by literally if you test oxygen in the wintertime, it'll be double what it is right now. So if it's 5-6 parts per million right now, 12-13 parts per million in the wintertime's not uncommon. And it's just because the water's cold. It just holds more oxygen when it's cold. So what happens is if it's been super hot in the pond, it's kind of shrinking the area where there's oxygen in the pond. It's making shallower and shallower. And then when rain comes and cools it off real quickly, it breaks those layers up and causes it to turn over. And it can just create a situation where just naturally the oxygen gets kind of sucked out of the water briefly. usually right before the sun comes up in the morning, and it can kill your fish. So anytime you're talking, fall transition times and storms, you've got turnover. It's called a turnover, and you've got turnover risk, and you'll have some fish kill risk around this time of year. It just happened. It's just a kind of a natural process that, like a tornado, you don't know where it's going to hit, but if it does, then it can knock you out.
Right. So with the flood waters, anybody living on the river is going to be susceptible to flood waters and everything like that. So do you think a fluctuation of water coming downhill with contaminants and anything else in the water, trash, and do you think that has effect on fish as well during these large storms that kind of cause the flooding?
Well, I think you're going to have more with flooding. To me, like, you definitely don't want trash, you don't want plastics and things like that, but you got them, so I've spent a lifetime picking that kind of stuff up out of the environment. But of course, we want to try to be as clean as possible out there. But that being said, if you want to look at if there's a bunch of trash in the water, yeah, that's ugly and bad and can possibly contaminate things. If there's a lot of sediment in the water, especially in a river, that's going to have a scouring effect. It's like a sandblaster. It's going to knock all the algae off the edges of the rocks where all the scrapers want to scrape. So it's going to reduce the food chain at its base. So if you're looking at a river and you see it's full of sand, full of sediment, full of sands and things that shift around in it every time it rains, that's way worse for the productivity of the river than any, bottles or tennis balls or anything like that.
Right.
The sediment loads are deadly. Just absolutely, just like I said, just taking a sandblaster to it and blasting the aquatic environment. So any place you see sediment loads, you'll see. I've actually seen it. I've worked on a few studies where we would look at like mountain streams and the diversity of fish, in a real pristine part of that in the same stream, but then you come downhill and you get into like agriculture areas where there's cow pastures around it, and then you go into like suburban areas, and it was always the agriculture area that had the lowest diversity. It's the same stream. You go up into the mountains, there'll be like 35 species of fish in it. You go down to town, and it goes up under a bridge and then through town, and like we said, it's got bottles in it, it's got some trash in it, might not look very pretty, but it still had like 25, 26 species of fish. But you go to that part where the cow pasture cuts through, it's like 5 species, 6 species, because the erosion covers the rocks. It changes everything in the river right there. And I guess until you really see it, once you see it, you'll never unsee it. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And once you know what you're looking at, you're like, wow, the sediment's bad here.
Yeah, because when going across some of these bridges down here and looking at after the flood kind of receded, and you're like, holy crap, where'd that white sand come from?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I ain't never known no white sand to be up in this part of the country.
Right.
But we had so many pond dams break above us.
Mm-hmm.
And, all them ponds ran into the Ogeechee River area downstream. And I guess with all that settlement coming down with it and everything else coming down with it, it just got into this area I'm talking about. It's off the river, but they're old sand pits that were dug for sand over the years, and the river flowed over into them, and it just caused havoc on the fishery. And we were worried about, she was worried about, the landowner herself was worried about, oh my God, I'm having a fish killed, or all my fish going to be killed in there. And I try to give her some information, and I was like, well, read this article, read that article. It could be, the salinity in the water as far as salt goes, that the younger fish couldn't, and, the older fish could take it, but the younger fish couldn't, because the fish kill that she had small brim and small bass under probably 12 inches that were dying.
Yeah.
But she never saw any kind of, I would say hand size or bigger brim or anything over maybe 14, 16-inch bass on up to 20-inch bass. She never saw them being killed in the ponds.
It can be funny that way. Generally speaking, fish kills like that aren't complete. A lot of times most of the fish live. But again, it depends on the size of the pond, and you'd know it. Like when all the fish die, it's a mess. It's a short enough mess.
Right. Oh yeah.
But again, it just depends, and sometimes too, you can have like people out here. People all the time talk about, oh, the fish swam off, so therefore it's healthy. That's not true. Bass are tough. They're going to swim off most of the time and die, and turtles will eat them, and you'll never see them again. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I'd still fall back on this time of year, but something, and especially with two different species of fish like that. If we flipped it around and say we go 6 months from now and we go out to the pond and you see you see another fish kill, but it's all crappie and it's all in March. Well, I'm going to put that on spawning stress, because you're not seeing different species of fish. You're only seeing one, and it's right at the time of year that they spawn. So you do the same thing. You could watch for bluegill to fire up a little bit later in the year, and if you see all bluegill dead, but the fact you've seen bass and bluegill, that kind of indicator right there, multiple species of fish is an oxygen kill generally.
Right. And that's what I kind of gathered from it, was the thermocline in the bodies of water kind of flipped upside down.
Yeah.
If that's understanding, I know you know how thermocline works and things like that, but just a regular person owning a pond, be like,
if you think about it, I guess the easiest way to think about it is the water's really warm, and it creates when you jump into a pond, it gets colder as you go down. So It creates a warm water layer that sits on top of a cold water layer, almost like a lava lamp, where the two liquids don't mix with each other. And so when it's super hot, that warm water layer is the spot where most of the oxygen is, and it's also the shallow water. And then you get that cold rain that comes in the next day. It cools that surface water off real fast, but there's a larger volume of water underneath it without oxygen than there is in the warm water layer because of the heat. And it's a heat related deal in the summertime.
Right.
So if you can visualize like a 2-layer cake, like a vanilla layer and a chocolate layer, but think about the vanilla layer is the layer with the oxygen, and it's just 1 inch thick. And the chocolate layer is the whole underneath side of it. Underneath is a little bit of icing, and then the chocolate's like 9 inches thick. So you have a much higher volume of water without oxygen than you do with. Right. That's the way I try to visualize it, And then when you think about it like that, you're like, okay, all that chocolate cake doesn't have oxygen, and just this little top piece does. Then once you see it like that, you'll understand what happened to the oxygen when it flipped.
Right. So, yeah, of course, everything needs oxygen to live, right?
Well, and that's the thing too. Like everything in the pond uses oxygen. The plants, the plankton, the fish, the insects. So again, in the summer, when you have a decrease in the amount of oxygen the water can hold, you have and everything in the pond wanting that oxygen at some point in the day. Like the plants in the plankton make oxygen when the sun is up, but they use it at night. They respire at night. So that could be something that depletes your oxygen at night, just having too much plankton in the water.
Gotcha. So would you say that a diffuser or a fountain might help to circulate that oxygen better throughout the whole
In
depth of the
theory,
pond? In
but
theory, yeah.
yeah, but you generally run into like only your really small ponds, like less than an acre. Have I ever had really good luck with that, with like mechanical aeration? You start getting, 5, 6, 8 acres impacted by like plankton to the point where it's killing fish. You can't aerate that much water mechanically cost effectively. When again, the heat just beats you. It just beats you to death. The heat's stupid. It says the argument about arguing with stupid people that drag you down their level and beat you with experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the heat. And that's exactly what it'll do to your pond. And if you got a heat related death, I've been on ponds that were that way where the fish died every August, September, and there wasn't one guy was a doctor, like a surgeon type doctor, had plenty of cash. He tried every kind of fountain, aeration, liquid oxygen, every kind of thing you could think of, and every August his fish still died.
Gotcha.
So there's, take that for what it's worth.
Yeah. So would you say that if you started out with a new pond or a small body of water and you had the opportunity to hit an underwater spring, would that kind of solve your problem, or would that?
You can have too much water flow too, because again, if you think about pond water, the base of the food chain in pond water is phytoplankton. So you need that plankton in the water. Literally, the more plankton you have, the more fish you have. It's a direct correlation, direct measurement.
Right.
And that's why you'll hear about guys who fertilize ponds. What they're actually doing is fertilizing plankton. You grow more plankton, you grow more fish. So if you built a small pond, usually like under 5 acres is where this kicks in, but you've got a stream that feeds it, or you've got a strong spring that feeds it, you can have too much water flow to where it's just flushing the water out, and you can't keep that plankton bloom dense. So in that specific example, that would be a way that too much water flow is working against you from a fish production standpoint, right?
Yeah, right.
Now I can beat that though. I can just put a feeder on it instead of trying to fertilize the plankton and keep all that mess in there. I just put food straight into the bluegill and feed them. So I've got tricks too, and that's kind of what we're doing at Sugar Hill. Those bluegill are mostly on feed.
Right.
And I keep them boosted. It's like having a turbo on an engine. I got the balance right when I stocked it. I didn't put too many bass in there, and I staggered it out the right way. And now that I've got it balanced right, the feeder just kind of acts like boost, kind of acts like nitrous. The bluegill that they're eating are bigger and healthier and fatter than the average bluegill you're going to get anywhere else. Therefore, my bass are growing at a faster rate.
Right. So talking about feeding for a minute, Shan, before we get off the air here, to all the listeners and viewers out there, if you're thinking about feeding, what type of, I guess, protein percentage would you actually feed your brim? Would you feed them year round, or would you just feed them like during the areas of their spawn and things like that?
Yeah, you only have to feed them when the water's 60 to 65 and above. About the 65 mark, they'll start eating. And once it drops below 60, they'll stop eating. They'll slow way down. And really, once it drops below 60, even if they're still eating, their body's not processing the food in the same way because they're cold-blooded. So their metabolism slowing way down with the temperature. So you're really just kind of wasting it to give it to them. But while they're growing, actively growing in the warm part of the year, we feed them every single day, multiple times sometimes. So consistency is key when you feed them, but also understanding when to feed. So feeding every single day, 365 days a year, that'd be a mistake. You only need to feed when it's warm. So kind of keep your fish will kind of tell you, they'll get lethargic. Like not right now. Right now they're still feeding like piranhas, but once it cools off a little bit, they'll like shut down by about 50%. It's like they're not nearly as moving as fast. They're not nearly as excited. And that you see that cold weather, setting in on them, and it's time to quit. And then we just fire it back up in the springtime, about 60 degrees, 65 degrees, right in there. And they go right back to chewing and feeding. But feeding consistently is really important. Like once you start feeding them, you can't stop feeding them because it's a significant difference in the amount of fish that can live in the pond. Like 4 times as many fish will live in the pond of a consistently fed pond. So, if you had a family of 4, imagine you had a family of 16. It fits 4 times as many people almost instantly. And then imagine taking away the food source for those 16 people. If you stop and start a feeding program, that's kind of what you're doing to your pond. And that's bad. It's actually better not to feed at all than it is to do that. But as long as you're feeding consistently, man, you can get incredible fish growth and really world-class fishing,
Yeah. I'm going to hit this question right here. Tim asked real quick. And we were talking about bubblers and fountains a while ago, diffusers and everything. And he says that he's caught more bass around the bubblers or diffusers in the pond. Is that because of the oxygen level there that the fish are staging there, or is it?
I'm not so sure they're not using those bubbles as like a screen, like almost like structure. Okay. But I know I agree with him. You'll see more fish around the bubbles than you will around the fountains. Not to say you can't catch fish around a fountain. You definitely can. Right. But I would agree with what he said there. I've seen more fish around them. I've seen more bait around them. Seems like there's just more feeding fish in those types of areas. But you got to consider too, it's probably in a deeper part of the pond. It's probably creating an upwelling, right? It's bringing nutrients off the bottom. It's bringing a different temperature of water up off the bottom, up into the water column. There's a lot of things going on there. If you think about those bubblers and what's going on around them, that was smart for him to pay attention to that. It's a good spot to fish.
Right. I find that a lot to do with river fishing, especially down here during the hot summer months when we have these storms come through and these little feeder creeks kind of fill up with water and start pushing out into the main river. You get that flow of fresh water in, and the bass tend to just stage up on that because 2 things: nutrients and new fish food coming out of the woodworks.
Yeah.
Would you say that was
worms alone? I used to work for one of my buddies at a pool company, and I'd help him out with it. And especially around Georgia, all around Georgia in there, it would rain, come a good hard rain, and you get up the next day and go into these swimming pools, and the whole bottom of the pool will just be covered in worms.
Yeah.
Because the ground got saturated and the worms didn't want to drown. So they come out and wiggle around in the air, get wiggled around, and you end up with 2 bait containers full of worms in the bottom of the pool every time it rains like that. And, if you think about that on a big level, and again, you see those little kind of sediment stained waters coming in and indicating flow. You're going to have, especially this time of year, you're going to have a temperature difference. Could be a negative temperature difference or a positive one. It just depends on what you got going that day. But you're going to have temperature changes in that flow. And then, of course, like we just said, like worms and bugs and Lord knows what else getting washed in, a food source for several different kinds of fish that bass are going to key on.
Right.
So
Michael Bradley had, I'm hitting this question Michael Bradley had to Shane before we end this thing is, he says, do northern strain slow down at the same pace as a southern strain? And he's referring to the different strands of bass, because you have a northern strand and a southern strand of bass here in the continental United States. So Do you
Well,
think that
there's some confusion around that too.
Okay.
Northern bass are not Florida bass, and Florida bass only pretty much live in Florida. So everything else in the whole country pretty much is a northern bass, and then Florida bass. And then actually, to make it even more confusing, they just decided they're not strains anymore. The northern bass is a completely different genetic. They're not subspecies anymore. Like a Florida bass is a Florida bass, and a northern bass is a northern bass, and they're completely genetically different now. Yes. So it depends on where you are. Like if you're in Florida, they strive to keep all the Florida fish here. And where you get into some misinformation, some of the things I have going with the pond, like we have pure Florida bass in the pond, but that's in North Georgia, up north of Atlanta. And I've noticed this pattern. And again, there's the little things that most guys don't know about. Again, it is a pond in North Georgia, but the Florida bass are not growing as fast as the northern strain bass in that pond. And I'm talking about by pounds. Where you stock Florida bass matters. And that's getting pretty close to the mountains. You get onto the intercoastal, you get closer to the coast in a more temperate climate, and you're going to see that smooth back out again. You're going to see fish growing closer to the same rates. But I was really surprised in the difference in the Florida bass in the pond because I have them tagged. I have them to differentiate them. And I've never been able to do that before. But yeah, the northern fish in the pond got to almost, well, there's a couple of them over 5 pounds, and we haven't seen any in Florida. It's just barely over 3. So some of those northern fish are 2 pounds heavier. Which, if you watch anything on social media, it's just kind of ingrained in everybody's head that Florida bass are bigger and Florida bass grow faster and Florida bass are magical, and they're not. If I had to give anybody advice at all, if you got a new pond, stock it with F1s, the cross between the Florida and the northern, it'll crush what I'm doing right now. Just stomp it out. The F1, which is a true hybrid now. I used to call them F1 hybrids, and they weren't really true hybrids, but they really are at this point, since they've split them up, the fish species, those F1s grow like rockets. I've got them 3 pounds in a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's quick.
Yeah. I've seen them go 15.5 inches and 2.5 pounds pretty consistently. And again, and I don't know why that is. I mean, sometimes you put, if you put 100 fish in 3 acres of water, well, 50 of those fish, just are male, so they ain't going to be 10 ever, right? They're going to top out about 5, 6. And then you'll see like the most of the fish, even in perfect conditions, some of the fish grow at like more normal rates, and some fish grow at like freak of nature rates. And I don't know why that is, why some of the fish just don't do that and some do. Obviously some are way more aggressive and feed way more often, because the only way they get bigger is by eating more often. Right. But you still have like that hierarchy of when there's available forage to both of the fish and one of them grossly outgrows the other one. I don't know why. Put that one back though and keep the other one.
I guess so. Start taking the F1s out the pond.
Yeah, I've had to do it.
Shan, it's been a very interesting and informational night with you, man. I could catch you every night. You could do a podcast every night, and you're going to say something different every night.
Yeah, it can be that way.
There's so much to learn about the fisheries, how to sustain a fishery, how to grow trophy bass. That you could start at the age of 16 and live to 100 and still not have all the knowledge.
Oh no, you're right about that, man. I still learn stuff every day.
Yeah.
And I'd be wary of anybody who claims they know everything about anything. You know, come on now. I've been doing this a long time, and you still see every single day, every single week on Instagram or whatever. I'll get a question. It's like, man, I've never even heard of that before. You know,
right? Yeah.
So you never know, man. But I'm glad it's helping everybody out, and it makes me proud that people can use the basic science and make themselves better fishermen and make themselves better stewards, for bass management.
That's right. And if y'all don't know Mr. Shan, he does have a relative weight ruler that he developed to kind of give you an insight on what a bass should weigh towards its inches and things like that. So if y'all are wanting one of them, y'all can reach out to him, and he will certainly get you in the right direction where you can purchase one, right? And if y'all can follow him on Instagram, he puts out a lot of good information about relative weight, about updates on Sugar Hill, what he's developed up there for that gentleman up in North Georgia. So Shan, I'd like to thank you once again for joining the show, getting information out for people. Do you have anything else to add tonight, man? Besides, go Braves! We need to win this one, man.
I know, right? We need a sweep. No, like you said, man, we could probably go on another hour and go on a different tangent, and that's okay too. There's another hour for that later on, and we'll come back around and address any questions anybody has. But I sure appreciate you having me on, and appreciate all the attention the page has got and all the people who follow. Thank you all a lot.
Yeah, he has certainly grown over the last year from a little boy to a grown man on social media.
Yeah.
So he's reached a lot of people, and a lot of people's reached him. So once again, Shan, thank you again. Just hang around with me for a few more minutes while I close out the show here, and we'll get back together here shortly. Hey guys, and thank you for another great show. Golly, there's a lot of information that man's head that we need to get out to everybody in the bass fishing industry, and maybe we can get him to get more catch and release stuff as far as measurement goes, and quit running bass all over the lake. But yeah, thank y'all. If you haven't already, look him up on Instagram, Facebook. He has a YouTube as well. He does some live shows on his YouTube channel, so check him out, Aquatic Biologist Shan O'Gorman. And thank y'all. And as always, wear your PFD while you're on the water, and fish on, folks.